Hey, what's up, fellas? It's Mike, and today we're going to talk about the Tiberius Arms T9. I know that Tiberius Arms got a couple different pistols that are out there, like the 8, the 8.1, and the T9, but for today's video, we're just going to focus on the T9 and probably do a little myth busting and talk about the first strike rounds. Now, I've had these guns for quite a while, these markers, should you say, but unfortunately, I've been having too much fun using them to actually do the review on them, but apologize to the folks at Tiberius that kept wondering, you know, hey Mike, when's the review going up, as I kept buying case upon case upon case of first strike rounds. So let's talk about first strike rounds. And what are they for maybe the people that are just joining the paintball community, you know, that are just, you know, learning about this. First strike rounds, basically what they've done, and let me get the remote here so we can zoom in a little bit. Basically what they've done here is they've taken a paintball, they've cut it in half, and then they've attached these fins on the underside of it. Okay, and what these fins do, or a skirt, as some people get, pretty much almost like a skirt, like a bed skirt. The fins are cut at an angle as such that when the barrel, you know, when this round comes out of your marker, it imparts a spin on it. Now, does it work? Oh my God, does it work? Yes, it works very, very well. I did a video, and unfortunately it didn't come out nearly as well as I thought it would because our audio crapped out on us, but I did a video on maximum range of paintballs. It was like a 45-minute video, and unfortunately all you got to see was Willie's side. You didn't get to see it from my side, but what I was doing over there was shooting a couple different guns, and we were just trying to see what is the max range that paintballs will fly, okay? So I think I had a Vanguard Creed over there. It was chronoed to 300 feet per second. I shot like 6 pods through it at all different ranges and velocities. And if I noticed, Willie was basically really close to where the rounds were landing. So if I was shooting and I saw Willie walking up, and then I arced the gun up even higher and I saw Willie dropping back, and I arced it up even more and I saw him dropping back even more, then I knew I was pretty close to where it was at. So I just keep, you know, adjusting the elevation, trying to get it to go as far as I possibly could. With a normal paintball gun, which was, you know, basically a standard barrel, 300 feet per second, normal paint, the average range we were getting was about 300 feet. Now, this isn't effective braking, okay? These balls are basically just dropping out of the sky at 300 feet. We were able to get the normal paintballs to go 300 feet. Then we put it on an Apex barrel, and we were able to get it to go about 330 feet. And then we put in the first strike rounds into the T9, and we had recorded breaks on Willie. You can watch the video. I believe he got hit twice, and both of the hits you can see on him at 500 feet, okay? So 500 feet is what we got breaks on. Now, max range was averaging right around about 530 feet. Okay, at 300 feet per second, the rounds were hitting at 530 feet. That's almost 2 football fields, okay? Almost 2 football fields. So, does it work? Absolutely. So, a normal paintball at 300 feet per second is going to travel about 300 feet. Put an Apex barrel on there, about 330. First strike rounds at 300 feet per second, you can expect to get ranges of over 500 feet. Now, you got to arc up a little bit, obviously, to get it out there, but you will have ranges of over 500 feet. And when we've had breaks on each other, shooting each other first strike rounds at over 500 feet. Maximum range ends up being about 530. You're going to get some that go a little further depending on the wind, but for the most part, about 530 feet is the max range of the first strike rounds. That's quite a distance. Okay, it's 200 feet further than a normal paintball. So absolutely do the first strike rounds break. Big concerns with safety. Okay, what is the safety with first strike rounds? Now, obviously, if you're getting breaks at over 500 feet, the biggest concern with first strike rounds, they don't slow down, okay? They don't appear to slow down at all when they come out of the gun, as opposed to normal paintballs. As they're going out, they seem to lose velocity. First strike rounds, that just doesn't happen. They just keep going. It's like shooting a crossbow. So there are some concerns in terms of safety. Now, me and Willie, we've gone in the backyard. I've shot myself many, many times with these. You know, we've hit each other from, you know, distances of, you know, between 10 to 30 feet. Haven't seen any sort of real concern. Now, I will say that because of the, you know, because of how fast they come out and because they don't slow down in speed, I do recommend that people that do use them, you obviously don't want to be bunkering people with these or hitting people from really close up with these type of rounds because they just don't slow down like normal paintballs. With a responsible user, and if anything, the cost of the rounds, which I believe these are about $6 to $7 for a tube of 8. I think it's like $6 for a tube of 8, so it works out to be like 75 cents a round. Not going to see a lot of people shooting a lot of these out there on the field for the time being. But from what I've seen, these rounds on the front, they're very brittle. They crack very easily. There are some concerns with the skirting around them, but I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen it blow holes through jerseys or anything like that. Shooting me and my friends with the first strike rounds. It does sting a little bit more because it doesn't slow down. That's probably one of the biggest things, is that getting hit from 100 feet away with a first strike round is going to feel like you're getting hit from 30 feet away with a normal paintball because the round just doesn't slow down as good. It's aerodynamically designed to fly further. But it is cool. Now here's something that I want to tell you guys with first strike rounds. If you say, Mike's full of shit. He's sold out to Tiberius Arms. I don't know. It's the internet. Whatever. If you are doubting what I am saying, okay, and you don't believe that there's no way that a paintball can fly 500 feet, okay, call Eric at Tiberius Arms, okay, ask him to send you out a tube or 2 of these, or 3, or whatever. They're a couple bucks each. I mean, $20 and you get 3 tubes shipped to your house or something like that. I don't know what he's charging, but just have him ship you a couple tubes. Take them and put them in your favorite paintball gun, whatever it is, Spider, Eagle, whatever you want. Just put it in the paintball gun, put it in the barrel, and shoot it in your backyard, or shoot it at the field or whatever, okay? You're going to see how far these things go. Your jaw's going to hit the floor, just like when my jaw hit the floor when I first saw these things come out. I think it was in March or whatever when we got them in from Extravaganza. So if you doubt the technology and you say you're considering getting a Tiberius T9 or T8 or any of the products that shoot the first strike rounds, and you just want to check out the rounds first before you make the investment, which is a smart move, just buy a couple of the rounds and test it out in your backyard. And then just imagine you can shoot over and over and over again with the with the scope dialed in or red dot dialed in or anything like that. So if you doubt what I'm saying, you doubt the video, or you doubt what the results that you've been seeing on the internet and this, that, and the other, just buy a tube. It's one of the cheapest, most economical ways to prove it to yourself is to just go and buy a tube, 8 rounds, put it in your gun and shoot it. So that's it for anybody that wants to, that really wants to test this out before making the investment. Just buy a tube. Now, this is the T9. It's got the new tack rail on the bottom of it. It's also got the flat top Picatinny rail across the top and just a muzzle brake. Very simple here. As you can see over here, and we're going to get into this in a few minutes, this is probably what you would call probably a fully decked out T9. It's got I put an ACOG on it. You can get these off of eBay for like like 50, 60 bucks, just the wannabe ACOGs. They work great. It's got the shroud on the front. It's got the barrel extender. It's got the fake silencer. It's got the elbow on here. It's got the car stock. It's also got the bipod. So this is a pretty decked out T9. And, Tiberius Arms has got all those accessories. When you purchase a T9, you get a nice little hard case, which comes in handy. You can put all of your parts in here, everything. It's a nice foam padded hard case. Also, another thing that they offer is this is the magazine holder. Now, something that you can do on the back here is you can actually rip out the leg clip or the leg restraint and put your belt through it. But this gun won Tech PB's Ultimate Gun of the Year award. Okay, over the Eagles, over the Luxes, over the DMs, over everything. Why? Because when we used it, there's nothing else on the market that'll shoot around 500 feet at 300 feet per second. It just doesn't exist. So, the T9 does it. That's why we gave it to it. The technology that's in this round is amazing. I love these guns. I absolutely love them. That's why it took me forever to actually finally do the review on them. But let's also talk about the magazines. The magazines, you can either run them off of CO2 cartridges, which you're going to get probably a little over 20 shots at 300 feet per second. If you're running off of CO2 cartridges, you can probably stretch it out to 3 full magazines, so 3 magazines of 8, and then your CO2 cartridge is going to die. Or you can run it off a remote line. Very simple. You basically split the magazine, put the remote line in there, put the nut on there, and screw it back in. Or I believe you can even order them from Tiberius Arms with the remote line already on it. This is definitely, with the remote line, is probably the way to go. If you are running it with a hopper, you probably want to run it with a remote line on the bottom. But let's do 2 things here. let's go ahead and I want to do some myth busting really quick, because a lot of people that I tell them, you know, they're like, I want to get a pistol, but I want to get the T9 because I don't want to always be buying first strike rounds. You can use normal paintballs through first strike magazines and first strike barrels, no problem at all. If you ordered the T9 and you had it set up for first strike rounds, you can put normal paintballs in here. So you don't believe me? Well, let's go out to the patio and let's test it out. And we're out here on the patio, and I apologize if it's a little bit dark, it's at night, but the purpose of this part of the video is to do some myth busting on the Tiberius T9. A lot of people think that if you buy a T9 that is ready to shoot first strike rounds, that you can't shoot normal paint, and that's just unfortunately not true at all. You can shoot regular paint through the same magazine and the same barrel that you use to shoot the first strike round. So what I want to show you here is what we got on the table. I've got a magazine here with a CO2 cartridge ready to go, and this magazine accepts first strike rounds. I've got a Tiberius T9 here with a first strike ready barrel. And I also have a clear Pinocchio hopper, because what I'm going to show you is after we go through the first couple shots, I'm going to show you that you can attach the loader on here and rotate it. And I also have a Tiberius magazine here with the remote line attached. Now, how the remote line works is basically they replace the CO2 cartridge assembly with a tube that goes right up to the valve, and you can run a remote line. And this, you know, this does have air going into it. So the first thing I want to do is let's go ahead and load up the magazine with first strike rounds. Now the magazine's kind of nice because you push the button and it goes all the way down to the bottom. Let's pour out some first strike rounds here. And then you just got to push this little bar back. And we'll load up all 8 first strike rounds. And then we'll let the magazine go. There we go. And then now what we're going to do is, since it is nighttime, let's go ahead and turn on the chronograph here, and hopefully you should be able to see the first shot's 294, so hopefully you can see that we are actually okay, so we're all sitting right around about 200 and about 290 feet per second. Now, using the same magazine, we're going to take some premium here, put it into the same exact magazine. Oops. Don't worry about that one. Rocky will get that one later. And let's go ahead and put some rounds in here. And now let's go ahead and put this in the marker. And then we're going to shoot a couple more of the chronograph. Okay, now that was shooting RPS Premium, as you saw, through the same magazine, you know, the same magazine and everything, so it does accept both. Now, let's go another route, and I want to show you that with the remote line, you know, pretty much the same effect, but this time what we're going to do is with the remote line. Now, you can run CO2 and go through the elbow. That doesn't make a difference. You can do it any way you want. Let's go ahead and rotate the barrel. Okay. And my barrel should be rotated and in place, and it is. So now what we're going to do is let's go ahead and put the Pinocchio on here. You just have to pardon me for a second as I tighten it down. And put some rounds in here. Okay. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to put the remote line magazine into the gun. Okay. And then now what we'll do is we'll, okay, got the loader on. And now let's shoot some over the chronograph here. There we go. So as you can see, very easy to transition from hopper fed, first strike fed, normal paintball fed, CO2 fed, or remote line fed. Very easy to there we go. And that's it. So alright, so let's start taking apart the T9. First thing you want to do is remove the magazine. And now the next thing you want to do is remove the barrel. Now I typically like at this point to remove the pin holding the trigger in place. You're going to see here in a few seconds the hardest thing about the T9, believe it or not, is getting the trigger in or out of the gun. Everything else is easy. Getting the trigger in and out, that's the hardest part. Now usually you're going to have 3 screws that you're going to have to remove. One here in the middle, and usually the bolt will drop out. And let's go ahead and remove the one in the back. Okay, now let's carefully push, and there goes the bolt and the spring. Now I'm going to show you that part, the 3 parts that orientate around the safety. There's a bolt that goes up through the center, and there's a spring on top, and it's kind of a balancing act when you put those back into the gun. But let's go ahead and push out the trigger. Okay, out comes the trigger. Now let's go ahead and take a few seconds here and focus on this assembly here, the safety assembly. There's a bolt at the bottom that holds it all in place, and there's a spring. You're going to have to balance that on there just like that when you put the 2 halves back together again. Okay. So let's go ahead and set apart the trigger assembly aside. Now what you're going to do is let's go ahead and unscrew this screw that's holding the trigger pack and the regulator to the top part of the body. Now let's go ahead and start working on this. Now this part of the gun, this whole trigger assembly, you never have to take this apart. Okay, I would never take this apart. There's like 10 springs in here, little tiny sears that trip other sears. Don't ever try to take this apart. The regulator, on the other hand, is very easy to service. Take a screwdriver and remove the top half, and this is where we're going to get into the regulator valve. Now you have 4 parts here. Be careful, there's a little ball bearing. Okay, there we go. You have actually 5 parts that make up the regulator. You have this little piece right here. It's kind of like a bearing carrier. You have the ball bearing. There's an O-ring that holds the ball bearing in place, the spring in the back, and then you have basically this Phillips head screw that holds it all in place. There's 5 pieces here on the back part of the regulator. If you want to put it all back together again, take the ball bearing, drop it down into there first, take the O-ring, put it up on top. Now a good lube for the inside of these guns is something like Planet Eclipse lube. It seems to work pretty well. Any sort of gun oil generally works pretty well. What you're going to do is take this and then drop it back into the regulator housing. Let's go ahead and put the spring back into place. There we go. Now let's take this little Phillips head part. And tighten it back down. Not a lot to the valve. Now let's go ahead and let's get into the piston. Now what you're going to do now, the first thing I would recommend you do is count about how many threads you have this adjustment nut screwed in. It looks like here I have it about 5 threads in. And basically the reason why you always want to do that is just so you don't, you kind of have a good place to start when you get back over to the chronograph. Now I'm going to drop the valve part out of the gun one more time because you kind of need to in order to push the piston out. Take an Allen key, carefully press the piston out of the bottom, and out comes the piston. So there's not a lot to this. If you're using CO2 cartridges a lot, you'll have to maintain this a little bit more. High pressure air, you won't have to maintain it as much. You can use something like a Planet Eclipse gun oil if you want. Any of the Dow, like Dow 55 or something like that. Dow 55 works just fine also. Use a little bit of it. So we'll put a little Dow 55 on it. And guns are amazingly tolerant on what kind of lube or oil that you use. So now we got this all put back together again, or all nice and lubed. Let's go ahead and drop it back into the gun, or into the regulator housing here. And you pretty much want to push it all the way in until the point of this goes through the hole. Now I'll take a little bit of this dowel, put it up here on the front. You don't want to push that spring too hard, because if you push the spring too hard, it'll push the ball bearing and the O-ring out. So I generally prefer to put the spring in, last. There we go. Tighten that back up, and let's go ahead and put the big spring in here, the adjustment nut. And we're going to start tightening it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so we're all done there. So we just maintained the regulator. Now the next part of the gun, let's go ahead and remove the bolt assembly. Now it's just 4 screws holding the bolt assembly to the back of the gun. Now you're going to have 2 short ones and 2 long ones. There's another long one. Here comes the short one. Now the bolt will pop out, and the spring is going to drop out with it. There's nothing really else inside of this to maintain, so we'll go ahead and set that aside. Okay, if you want to remove this, you don't have to. There's nothing inside here, but let's go ahead and remove it anyway. I know somebody's going to get curious. Maybe a spring will leak or something like that. You're going to notice that there is a flange for you to grab onto with a pair of pliers. Just carefully unscrew it, and you'll see there's nothing in here. It's basically a volumizer, but there's nothing in there. There's no serviceable parts or anything inside there. But since we got it apart, let's go ahead and put a little bit of Dow 55 on it, on the O-ring. And we'll screw it back in. Next thing we're going to work with is the bleed valve. Now basically how the bleed valve works is pretty simple design, or a relief valve. Once the air pressure hits a certain amount, it bleeds out of the side of the gun. This is to prevent your gun from spiking or anything like that. How you set your bleed valve, or how I set my bleed valve, is pretty simple. That's it. You only have 3 parts. You've got the valve itself, you've got a spring, and an adjustment screw. Okay? How you set this is very simple. How you set this. Go ahead and drop this. We'll go ahead and put a little bit of Dow 55 on it really quick. Just clean it up, put it back down into the gun. How I set this is pretty simple. Take your gun. Okay, first thing you want to do, tighten this all the way down until it stops. Okay? Torque it all the way down. Take your gun and go and chronograph it. Okay? So let's say you chronograph your gun at 290 feet per second. Then what you do is you back the relief valve out until the gun starts to hiss. So you start to see your air coming out of the side of the gun here. Then what you do is tighten it up about a half a turn, and you should be good to go. But that's how the safety valve works here, or the relief valve here. It prevents the gun from becoming overpressurized and you getting hot shots from spiking CO2 cartridges in and out of the gun. Like if liquid CO2 gets in there or something like that, it'll vent out of the side. So how you want to calibrate it? Tighten it all the way down, okay, until the adjustment nut stops. Chronograph your gun to like 290 feet per second. And then with the CO2 cartridge still in there, start backing it out till you hear it start to hiss a little bit out of the side, and then tighten it about a half a turn, and you never have to touch it again. That's about it. Pretty simple. Now let's find the bolt. Here's the bolt. Pretty much all you got to do is clean this up, lube it. Just inspect it for any wears or nicks. Let's go ahead and put a little bit of oil there on that O-ring. Slide the bolt back into place. And put the spring, you will put the spring on here in a second. Now there is a O-ring here that you do want to mind that connects the bolt assembly to the regulator. Let's go ahead and drop the spring in. Now the spring does have a red end and a black end. Let's just put it with the red end facing back. Drop the spring in. Now one of the most important parts when taking apart the Tiberius T9, you put it back together again. You know, you're going to have flashbacks to the Automag days with putting the bolt all the way back. Can't do that with the T9 because it doesn't catch the sear. So I'll show you here in a second. Now we have 2 long screws and 2 short screws. Long screws go up top, short screws go at the bottom. What you want to do here is you always want to make sure you leave just a little bit of a gap for your sear to get behind here on your bolt, okay? You see that? If you have your bolt all the way back like that, that's bad. Your gun's not going to shoot. You want to slide it forward about that far, okay? Just a little bit so that your sear can go inside there. If you don't do that, you're going to start pulling the trigger on your gun. Your gun's not going to shoot. Let's go ahead and drop this into place. So let's just line this up. There we go, lined up. Now let's go ahead and take the screw. I think that was the right one. There we go. And let's tighten the body, the regulator to the valve. There we go. Okay, now here's the hardest part about getting, putting the T9 back together again. It's going to be getting the trigger back into the gun. Now I don't worry too much about the main bolt here or the spring right now. We'll put that together after we put the trigger in, but definitely putting the trigger in at this stage is one of the hardest parts. What I basically do is get the trigger spring in and then push the trigger in after it. So just get the spring in. Once you get the spring in, you should be able to get the body in right after it. You almost need 3 hands to do this. Oops. It's going to pop out a couple times. There we go. Okay. Now once you have the trigger in place, you can start to get the rest of the body kind of lined up. You just got to kind of wiggle it. There we go. Okay, we're getting pretty close. Now the fun part. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to lift the body up slightly. Put the bolt up through the middle. Okay, now you're going to put that spring right on top of the bolt. And once the spring goes on top of that bolt and you got it nice and balanced, you can put the 2 halves together. It's the hardest part about taking apart the T9. There we go. Okay. Now let's go ahead and tighten down that assembly right away. Now the trigger pin usually is the first thing I take out and the last thing that I put in. Okay, now what I do is now you're just going to have to stare through the, you're going to kind of have to stare through there to line up the trigger pin till you see daylight. And then once you see daylight, you can start putting the pin in. Now do a little bit of wiggling. Once you get the pin in, tap it down. Put the rest of the screws in. You got 2 more body screws that you have to put in. One in the front, one in the back. Okay, and importantly, you do need to put the barrel in to test your gun out. There we go. Safety works. And then now if you want to test it, you can take your magazine, put it in. No leaks, no problems, gun shooting. All right. And of course we just ran out of CO2. So there we go. So you just took apart and serviced your Tiberius T9. So let's wrap the video up and let's talk about what do I think of these markers. I think they're great. You know, I think the Tiberius T9 is a great little pistol. The versatility of being able to use CO2 cartridges, remote line, hopper fed, magazine fed, I think is great. They're built really well. The customer service is great. Eric at Tiberius Arms is great. They have a good customer service and warranty. Turnaround times really fast and easy. You know, these guns don't require a lot of maintenance. Basically shoot them till you have a leak and then take them apart. There's not a lot you really have to do to these markers on your own. As you guys saw, taking apart the markers, pretty easy. Hardest part, like I said, putting the trigger back in. That's a little bit of a nightmare. You just got to take your time with it. You know, punch the trigger pin back in and stuff like that. But other than that, you know, really nice little guns. You know, probably the biggest complaint a lot of people have with them is that the grip frame is a little bit wider than what you would expect a normal, you know, basically a normal handgun to be. But, you know, it's basically because they're putting the rounds and also the CO2 cartridge into the gun. So, you know, with that being said, you know, if you have any doubts about the first strike rounds, okay, if you have any doubts whatsoever, if you think it's all nonsense, there's no way you can shoot 500 feet, call Tiberius Arms up and just order a tube. That's all you got to do. Test it out for yourself. If you see what the round does, and you've seen, you know, in my backyard we showed you that it works off of normal rounds, also go through the same magazine and the same barrel as the first strike rounds. Okay, so just because you get the first strike kit or the first strike capable T9 doesn't mean you can't shoot normal paintballs. You can put them through your hopper, put them through your magazine, put them through remote line or CO2. So that's not a limiting factor. But if you get to a scenario game and they do allow the first strike rounds, all you got to do is buy a couple tubes, go there and play and have a good time. What do I think of the expense of it? I think the expense is exactly what it is. You've got the ability to hit people at over 500 feet. Should charge 75 cents a round. I mean, I know if somebody came up to me at a scenario game and said, hey, look, if you give me 75 cents right now, I'll go and take that guy out in the middle of the field, I'd pay him for it. So it's worth 75 cents when you see the precision shots and the range that you get. Let's talk about chronoing. A lot of people have, you know, concerns about chronoing. Well, what if I go to the field and I've got to chrono it, okay? It's going to cost me $2 a chrono. So what? Okay? So what? That's the cost of using this kind of technology. If it takes you 8 rounds to dial your gun into 280 or 290 feet per second, well, you just spend $6. Don't cry to me about it, okay? Especially when you're going to be hitting people at over 500 feet with the gun and being able to shoot through holes that other people aren't going to be able to do, hitting people at 400 feet, you know, 100 feet further than normal paintball. So I have no, you know, I don't want to hear any whining or crying about, well, I'm going to have to chrono that gun, yada, 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 okay? If you really are conscious or you really just don't think you're not going to be able to turn the Allen key to get your velocity down, chrono your gun with normal paintballs at about 250 feet per second. With the first strike rounds in there, you should be right around probably about 280, 290, and then go from there. But, you know, not really a valid complaint. I don't think, you know, scenario games, you know, I don't think that's a valid complaint. You know what? You're using new technology. It's like buying a sports car, okay? Buying a sports car and then complaining you got to put 93 octane in there, okay? It's just, shut up. Anyway, so that's it. TiberiusArms.com. Go check them out. I love these guns. Very deserving of the gun of the year. Use these at Living Legends. I've used these in a bunch of woods ball games, stuff like that. They're an absolute blast. We've tested these things to hell and gone. You see me and Willie shooting each other in the backyard with them. I definitely think you should, if you do have first strike rounds, you should issue a little bit of restraint. You don't want to be bunkering people with these guns, but 280 feet per second, 30 plus feet away, I don't see any problem with these guns at all. Thanks a bunch. Check out TiberiusArms.com.